we have decided, guys, that we do a little bit of extra content for you because the history episode was so popular. And you know, we all know that you're gagging for the next one, but we thought we'd give you something to tide you over. And Daisy's gonna fill in some of the gaps in our history knowledge from our Sarah and Rosa episode today.
Well, give yourself a bit more credit. I'm not filling in gaps. It's more extra stuff around the outside.
Okay.
Basically, Alice, we didn't say anything actually outrageously controversial or damaging to the person who is no longer here.
Nothing outright wrong.
Yeah, Lucy seemed to think that I was going to turn up going, and you got this wrong and this wrong and this
exactly
wrong, and you are
banned
banned from history.
Just let me do it from now on.
Yeah. Do not worry, I do not have the power to ban anyone from history.
Yes.
So, I'm excited.
It's like a proper history lesson.
So this is a picture that I remember from school. So when I studied the suffrage movement at school, thank you, Mrs. Barnett and Mr. Cliff, this was one that we were shown quite early on, so I'm very familiar with it, and I kind of assumed that a lot of other people would be as well. But given how hard it was to find this when I remembered it, I'm wondering if it is not as typical. So to describe it, this is a poster made by an arts collective called the Suffrage Atelier, and on the top it says what a woman may be and yet not have the vote, and it's split into 5 sections where, you know, mayor, and there's a woman dressed as a mayor, and a nurse, a mother, a doctor or teacher, and a factory hand. Mm-hmm. So a woman can be a mayor or a doctor and still not be able to have the vote. Yeah. And underneath you've got what a man may have been and yet not lose the vote, where you have convict, lunatic, proprietor of white slaves, unfit for service, and
unfit for service.
So unfit for service, you very clearly have a man on crutches.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so it's contrasting who they call worthy with getting the vote with unworthy men who might have the vote, in a way that naturally does fall to, they see people who are disabled and have mental illness as unworthy of the vote. Yeah. So they are more worthy of the vote than those disabled and ill people.
I also like owners of white slaves.
Yeah. The black slaves, that's fine.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah, black slaves, absolutely no problem at all. White slaves, you're crossing a line.
Yeah. It's like, there was an argument that was frequently used against universal suffrage, was the idea that women, if they were given the vote, would become disabled because they had to think too hard.
Oh no.
Thinking about who to vote for would make women disabled.
And did they say what kind of disability thinking gives you?
They were unspecific, but I assume it was probably not physical.
Right, okay.
I don't know.
They linked a lot of, you know, hysteria and those kind of, you know, symptoms that they would put down to being a woman and your wandering womb and all of that.
I immediately kind of went for, like, I don't know, jelly legs or something. You're just so overwhelmed you can't walk.
You keep fainting a lot.
Yeah. I also like that if your brain, you know, you've got to use all this thinking to decide who to vote for, but being a mayor, that bears, and a doctor and a nurse, it bears absolutely no intellect or responsibility.
Or being a mother.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it doesn't take any hard work.
No.
Yeah, so this is basically what they're saying. It's kind of, you know, if you know, thinking caused us that many problems, then we wouldn't be teachers.
Yes.
I mean, so rather than the suffragettes kind of being like, what? No, that's not how any of this works. That's not how voting and thinking and all of that works.
Mm.
And, you know, saying that, well, whether they're disabled or ill or not, it shouldn't make any difference. They just kind of doubled down on it. And this isn't the only sort of, you know, poster or leaflet or pamphlet or whatever that illustrates that they thought that they were being classified amongst the ranks of disabled and chronically ill and mentally ill people, and they were not happy about it. It was kind of the attitude that they were prevented from voting for perfectly valid reasons. That's fine, but you can't say that I'm the same as a disabled person who can't even fight in the war.
Yeah,
happening.
Yeah, it's and it's, you know, invalidating all of those disabled people or chronically ill people, you know, and they couldn't, like, they get to have the vote. And no,
I think this boils down to the fact that everybody back, you know, when women were fighting for the vote, everybody had a tendency to think that people who were disabled were just a bit daft. Do you know what I mean? And a bit like wishy-washy and weak. Like, do you know what I mean? It's that kind of...
Yes, it's that feeble.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's the word they often
That was
use.
the word I was looking for, Dave. Yes.
Yeah, it's just, you know, I mean, women are a lower class, but I mean, it could be worse. You could be disabled.
Yeah.
So, you know, the three of us, nice disabled ladies, we wouldn't get a look in.
No, we were right down the bottom of the barrel for anything.
We're just very lucky that we're white.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's one of these things that I've always been kind of very very aware of when people kind of talk about and you know, raise the suffragettes as a kind of a topic that's almost beyond like, you can't criticize it in any way. You can't have that sort of, you know, critical thinking, otherwise
you're not a feminist.
Yeah, and it's kind of, you know, we can appreciate what they did while not appreciating the way they went about it.
Yeah.
Because
I mean,
unfortunately those attitudes do still prevail in a lot of places, whether that is within, you know, feminist circles or, you know, all over the place. These attitudes are still there, and so part of me always thinks, you know, how different could it have been if this massive movement hadn't been so much like that?
Well, and I think the suffragette movement is interesting because, I mean, Emmeline Pankhurst was not the nicest lady, you know, and she was, you know, she was proof that you can be a feminist but also be a racist, and this, you know, this image is proof that you can be a feminist and also be an ableist. I think it takes a lot. Even now, it's quite progressive for people to you know, sort of cross those kind of campaigning and issue-based barriers, isn't it? To sort of be like, well, you know, I care about more than one thing.
Yeah.
So it's certainly something that's still talked about in LGBT plus circles. It's sort of, you know, racism and ableism and, you know, things like that around there. I certainly know of plenty of people who are wary of where they go. For reasons like that. It's like I say, it's the kind of time frame where you can sort of be like, you know, oh well, you can't judge them on the standards of today. I beg to differ. Yes, I can, but there's always that thing at the back of your mind, which is, you know, how it could have gone. Yeah.
Well, and I always think, you know, I listen to a lot of history podcasts, and there's always that conversation about whether you judge a person, you know, a person's views and behaviours by today's standards or by the values that were held then. And I think there's a big difference between going, well, I can understand why a person may be swayed or influenced by their values, but I think that there's a difference between going, okay, well, because it was the 1800s in the American South, and so people thought slavery was okay, and going, it's the 1800s in the American South, and I'm going to beat and rape people because they aren't human. There's a big difference there, and
that is people's nature, not the environment, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you know, your nature is who you are as a person. So if you've got a horrible nature, you would be a horrible person. If it's in your nature to be horrible, you will be a horrible person no matter what your environment. Do you know what I mean?
And I think that is one of the things sort of about the suffragette movement, is it was a upper middle class movement. It was women who essentially wanted to get theirs and didn't care about helping other people. You know, they didn't really care about getting rights for or help for a lot of other people. I mean, that was one of the things that was really interesting about Rosa, was, you know, that she did do that charity work, and she worked with those sex workers in Bethnal Green and things like that, didn't she?
Yeah, so and I did think, actually, coming away from that episode, listening back to it, because we recorded it quite early on. So when we got to listen back to it, there was a bit of me that thought to myself, did the suffragettes just see Rosa in a wheelchair and think, you know, this is a great opportunity for us to, you know, it's a vehicle for us to ram people's doorways and windows in with, rather than, isn't it great, aren't we being inclusive? Was she being used as a tool almost, and not necessarily the, you know, equality and diversity of our great political party? Was it more of a, in fact, she's got, you know, her legs are sticking out, she could probably hide a load of rocks under that chair kind of thing?
I suspect it was also partly a combination of the fact that, like, I bet, like, she was just mates with some of those people.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where, like, they couldn't really be like, oh no, Rosa can't come. And so she kind of tagged along.
Rosa just rocked up anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, she was definitely like an attention grabbing person, you know, by her presence at those protests. You know, there's a lot more comments on what, you know, the woman in the wheelchair is doing. It's unusual enough that it grabs some of the attention, and that comes to the cause. But obviously there's, you know, a really decent chance that was done with her full knowledge and consent.
Yeah.
So when you were talking about Sarah Bernhard, you briefly mentioned right at the end, during all of the stuff that, you know, Alice was saying was really cool about her, but you didn't have time to go into.
Yes.
You were talking about her time during the Franco-Prussian War.
Yes. And how she turned her theatre into a hospital.
Yes, exactly. So I just kind of wanted to give a bit more detail about that.
Cool.
Really. Okay. Because it is really cool.
Okay.
Just so to show that I'm not 100% ignorant, my understanding is that France was not Frank. I don't know who Frank is.
Frank?
There probably was someone called Frank there as well, who was.
He was under siege. Yeah. And the hospitals were basically already, the existing hospitals and stuff were struggling and overrun. And Sarah went, well, I'm going to turn my theatre into a hospital. And then because she knew so many, like, people in power, she also got a load of what's the word I'm looking for, like supplies and stuff diverted to her hospital and for her patients. And there's stories about how she'd skip meals so that she could give her food rations to her patients, and all these, you know, she was very up for that cause.
Yeah. So basically, they always call these places ambulances. So in her autobiography, it's ambulances, which they just mean like field hospitals. So, you know, not the official hospitals. That's just where they're from. So, yeah, the German and Prussian forces were coming towards Paris. So it's the siege of Paris. She sent her family away from Paris.
Right.
but she stayed.
Had she got both her legs at this point?
Yeah.
Yes.
This was the late 1800s, so she was probably only in her 30s.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
If
So
that, maybe.
so her son, daughter, child
She
of
had a
some description.
Son, I want to say Maurice, but that might be wrong.
Yeah. So
Was his name Frank? Was that Frank?
I don't think
quite
so.
possibly, yeah.
He's the one who said, "I don't care if my dad was Napoleon. My mum was Sarah Bernhardt."
Oh yeah. Yeah.
She does talk very highly of Napoleon throughout the autobiography. But yeah, so the child had been sent away with her parents out of Paris. She decided to stay, and she set up the field hospital in a theatre with some other actresses who worked there as well. It had room for 60 patients, although it often took a lot more. So a lot of the other ambulances were set up by like Americans and British people, and sort of you often had kind of like nationality specific field hospitals for, I mean, not necessarily intentionally, but sort of, it's like Anglo-American ones, just because, as you say, the hospitals didn't have space for everybody, and so it was kind of like, okay, if you come to this one, we'll at least be able to speak English to you.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. There are at least a few accounts of her taking in German soldiers
Really?
who were injured, even though they were the ones bombarding.
They were
them.
the enemy, yeah.
Yeah, and well, at one point she moved a German soldier who was very injured to their private room because he was being ribbed on so hard by the French soldiers around. And she
basically stop bullying him. I'm taking him away now.
Yeah.
Well, sort of, but the way that she wrote it wasn't kind of like she was deeply concerned for this, this man and didn't want him to be bullied. It was just that the patients wouldn't shut up.
That sounds like Sarah. You are inconveniencing me.
Yeah, every single time they started, saying something else that was hilarious, and he didn't. He spoke German. He didn't really know what they were on about.
So he didn't know he was being bullied, but because it was irritating for her, she was like, well, I'm just going to take you away.
Yeah. He did understand some of it.
Okay.
So he did speak a bit of French, but not all of it. And to be honest, it sounds like he didn't care enough.
I mean, I feel like at that point I don't care. I'm just glad to be in a hospital.
Yeah. Probably, yeah. Yeah, so the way they worked it is they would stay up for 2 nights, and then on the 3rd night they would sleep. So this was Sarah and the other actresses who worked there, so that 2 people were always on call to either accept new patients or to take care of the ones who were there.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of, a 3-day cycle of this where you would sleep once every 3 nights.
Wow.
Which was, yeah.
You don't want to be turning up, like arriving at the hospital on that, like
Second
that last
day.
night of the shift. Yeah. You want to
Yeah.
the person's fresh first night.
Yeah. So she also assisted in a number of surgeries.
Oh god.
Yeah, so
Oh.
this is not where quotes are coming up. I will save it for the end, don't worry.
Yeah.
Just say, so there are reports that these weren't this wasn't specifically mentioned in her autobiography, but there are some reports from other places that she assisted in amputations.
Wow.
Which is one of the reasons I thought this would be good to bring up, because, imagine her assisting in a surgery that she would later have.
Yeah.
Thought it was a
she
fascinating
probably
idea.
knew, whilst they were cutting her leg off, she probably knew what they were doing, how they were doing it. I don't know whether
she's probably going, no, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Although,
Yeah.
at the very least, it may well sort of demystified the entire
Yeah.
process. It's kind of, like losing a leg, no big deal. I've done it to loads of people. God, get a grip.
Do you think that would probably make Sarah think, when she was in that pain with her leg, like, just get rid of it?
That's what I was thinking, that she's not, one of the things that you've talked about before, Lucy, is people being scared of becoming disabled. But she's been, she's kind of seen what happens and gone, it's not that bad. And
Yeah.
so, maybe seeing that surgery and being involved in the surgery did make her go, oh, well, yeah, it's not that bad.
Yeah, like she knew, didn't she, that it's just because she's disabled, it's not an instant death.
Well, and she knew compared to the pain that she was in,
Yeah.
the sacrifice that she may have to face once she was disabled was worth it, because she'd seen these people, that those amputations probably saved people's lives.
Yeah, she also speaks a lot of during these sections of the soldiers that she got in. She compares sort of the bravery of some of them versus the cowardliness of others.
Really?
So there was one man who seemed to, every single time he was on the verge of being discharged as well enough to be, sent back to fight, he would get dysentery.
Right.
Yeah.
And they were
Like,
going,
almost...
how is this even possible to just repeatedly get dysentery? And they found out he was chipping bits of something off a pipe on the side.
Making himself, so he was making himself sick, so he didn't have to go
back to the front. Yeah,
and she is scathing,
I bet,
in those people who she deems as essentially wusses,
and
is really, highly praising of all of the ones who've, basically had a shell explode at them and then are going, nope, I'll be fine, just put a plaster on me and a wet paper towel like dinner ladies at school.
Yeah.
Send me back out, it'll be fine. Then she has to be a bit firm with them. It's like, no, sit down.
Yeah.
Have a rest.
She's basically sounds like a standard school nurse, to be fair.
I love her. This is making me love her more.
Yeah, but of course, having that sort of sense in her head of, this is how you bravely deal with this sort of thing. And this is how people hate it if you are. That's probably connected to her with her leg as well, because it's just sort of, I'm a brave person. I don't want to be a wuss. I'm not going to complain about it. Just get rid of it.
And I do think that, in this day and age when people are faced with disability, it does kind of of course it puts everything, when you become disabled, it puts everything into perspective. And it does take I always say that, I've had cerebral palsy since I was born. So in some respects,
never mentioned that before, Liz.
No, never. But in some respects, it is a bit like ignorance is bliss almost. I didn't have like 10, 15 years where I could walk, and then it's been taken away from me. And I think Sarah must have seen, like, this is how somebody who is well respected deals with disability. And then you have the cowards who sit there sucking copper pipes, going, don't step me back, kind of thing. She must have gone, well, I've got two choices. You either give in, or give it all you've got, kind of thing.
And I mean, I can understand the person choosing to suck a copper pipe, as you put it, Liz.
But quite. I mean, it's a terrible siege. It's kind of, for the most part, they were being sort of, the French soldiers were kind of being disarmed, and so if they survived and were well, they were just sort of walking back through the city in their army uniforms, just without any guns or weapons or anything, just sort of looking a bit sad. So why would you want to go back and fight that?
No, I can absolutely understand that, but also dysentery in 1880 something.
Yes, it's not like kind of sticking your head under a desk lamp and going, I've got temperature.
Yeah, I mean, she said in the autobiography that one of the nurses had watched this guy and seen him doing it, and they went, he could have easily died 4 times over. What he did, I don't want to go and fight in a war. I'll just
suck on a copper pipe
and possibly die.
Yeah, from
in bed,
dehydration and fever and a hideous, awful. Yeah, not.
No, that sounds like it came with experience.
No, I've never had dysentery.
No.
I mean, that's good. don't
Yes.
get dysentery.
Yeah. Well done, Alice. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Round of applause to everybody watching this who has never had dysentery.
Yeah. Round of applause.
Aren't we lucky to live in the first world where we have sanitation and indoor plumbing?
Yeah, based on my historical readings, do not recommend.
No.
0 out of 10. Yeah, so like you said just now, she used a lot of her connections as a, famous actress.
Yeah.
Even at this point, she was incredibly well known all over the place. There's a point during this where someone sees her and they get out a picture from a wallet and it's a picture of her. It's kind of, oh, my son loved you so much. The son was dead. That was sad. I'm bringing more depressing into this, god damn it. Yes, eventually, even though supplies ran out, there was a very unpleasant situation where they attempted to learn how to pickle meat.
Okay.
Why are they Daisy? Why are they pickling meat? What kind of meat are they pickling?
Regular, not human.
Okay.
Right, okay.
That was where my brain went.
Yeah.
I was like, wait, what meat are they pickling here?
Yeah.
Desperate times, but
Basically, they'd managed to get some meat a while back, and it was gonna go off, but they needed to save some of it because they weren't gonna get any more. And so they found some instructions for pickling meat, but it didn't go great. They opened.
It didn't go great, or it didn't go great.
It didn't go great.
Right. Okay.
They had very limited success.
Right.
They got out one of the big bottles at some point, and apparently the smell was incredibly awful.
What?
So they put it onto a plate to see whether it was just sort of that they weren't used to the, smell of stuff.
What I love is that this isn't the disgusting quotes bit.
No, I know.
No, this is just information. She wrote, "We felt sick all the time from the abominable exhalation."
Oh.
I mean, I don't want to make you actually gag.
No, it's fine. I know it's coming. It's fine.
She did say that it turned blue and then black.
Oh!
Just while it was on the plate.
Oh!
In 10 minutes.
Whilst it was on the plate, it went from pink to blue.
Apparently the water around it was sort of grey.
Like some kind of mood ring.
Yes. Sort of like that, except the mood was just no. The mood is, you are going to die of poisoning. You try and eat this.
Oh,
yeah, so she was going to throw it away.
I don't eat meat right now.
Yeah.
This is fine.
Yeah, she was going to throw it away, I think understandably.
Yeah.
And then the cook went, no, don't throw away meat, even if it is rotten.
Even if it's blue.
Even if it's rotten, do not throw away the meat. But then they didn't go into any more detail about whether they did eat it. All they said was that another sort of field hospital place nearby had done the same thing, and they'd thrown it away, and then they'd been beaten by a load of wandering past people for throwing away meat, for throwing away food when everyone was so short.
Wow.
So
that could kill you. I mean, it would have killed you, wouldn't it? Blue meat would kill you.
I mean, she never said whether they did eat it or whether they just sort of put it back on the shelf and just kind of we'll get rid of this in the dead of night instead, or something. They just said, oh, don't throw it away. And it was good that we didn't throw it away because someone else got beaten up down the road. And I'm like,
and you're there going, well, what did you do with it?
Yeah. Tell me about the blue beef. Yeah. Eventually they ran out of a lot of food, and Sarah and the nurses had to start skipping meals and things like that. And then they started with bombing. not just sort of, you know, the armies coming and shooting at things, like actual bombing. And so all the patients had to be moved to the basement, which in a theatre would be sort of like, you know, where all the stage ropes are and dressing rooms and where all the props are. And I quite like the idea of them doing like a mock sword fight down there.
I don't know, I feel like that would be re-traumatizing for a lot of those soldiers.
Well, not many of them were fighting with swords. It's all more guns and shells and things. But because maybe they took them back out.
Maybe.
So yeah, so I mean, I really tried to find out what happened at the end of the bombardment, essentially at the end of the siege. But her autobiography kind of goes off on a bit of a tangent.
Right.
So she found out that her family, when they left Paris to stay safe, had gone to a place called Homburg, which is in Germany. And she was just fuming. How could you go to Germany? We're at war with the
Doing
Germans.
all of this.
I think though, from what I read about her mum, like that is kind of classic Julie though. Julie just did what Julie wanted. She gave no shits about anybody else. She fucked off to England for a while and didn't tell her daughter. So
apparently there's quite a nice spa in Hamburg.
I see.
So,
yeah, there you go.
it all gone there. So she goes off to go and find her family, essentially, to make sure that they're still all right. And it's just, but what about the hospital?
I've had enough of this now.
Because
Wow.
the main source that we have for this is her autobiography.
You
know, other things that have been written are primarily based on this autobiography.
Yeah.
So she doesn't tell me what happens. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just assuming that, like,
God damn it, Sarah.
Like, I guess everyone was cured and the war ended and they all sort of linked arms and started dancing around in a happy little circle.
I mean, I have been to Paris. The siege is not still going on.
No.
There was another really rather famous siege of Paris a few years later. So, I mean, we know it ended at some point. We just don't know what Sarah was doing.
Yeah, and we know it ended because she went back.
Yeah.
She went back to the theatre to work. So the next time it is mentioned in the autobiography is when she is sent a new script. It's kind of like, okay, now you rehearse this.
It's almost like she got very, very drunk whilst like dictating this story to somebody and went, yeah, and then so then basically we moved all the people down the basement, but then I went off and did.
Yeah, and then I went and got on a train and everyone was really annoyed with me and there was no first class on the train. And
that really reminds me of, in the episode, Lucy was like, she reminds me of Paul O'Grady, and it's like you can imagine Paul O'Grady being a fucking nightmare if you got on the wrong side of him, and like that you can absolutely see Paul O'Grady being like, what do you mean you don't have a first class carriage for dogs?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I guess I don't really blame her too much for only talking about this siege for sort of 2 chapters, because it was bad.
Yeah,
it was bad. She saw some awful things, and some of what she writes about the whole thing is really, really unpleasant. Here is where you can have some horrible quotes if you want them.
Okay, yeah, go on then.
Okay,
all right.
So this is referring to one of her patients who came in. So a soldier who came in, and she describes how she found him. So it was sort of just outside the door. So what happened was that people would come down and come past with like people and just shout ambulance, ambulance, and you would go outside and say that you could take them or say that you were full.
Yeah.
And this person in particular was brought by someone who was saying, look, I know you said that you're full, but he won't survive. He has to go to the next closest place.
Right.
So he was half lying down his body supported by a heap of dead. I raised my lantern to look at his face and found his ear and part of his jaw had been blown off.
Mm.
It's gonna get worse, Lucy, I'm afraid. Great clots of blood coagulated by the cold hung from his lower jaw.
Ooh.
And there was a wild look in his eyes.
Yeah, I'm not fucking surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah, there
I
would
don't
be,
blame you,
right?
mate, to be fair.
Yeah. You're not going to be like staring serenely and, oh, I'm having such a nice time.
Yeah. So, I mean, that one is comparatively charming.
Yeah. Tame.
Because at least that was a soldier.
Yeah.
So he was involved
Yeah.
Mhm.
and was alive enough to have a wild look in his eyes.
Mhm.
Oh God, I know where this is going.
So obviously there are a lot of, you know, poor people who couldn't really do much and couldn't really afford much, sort of roaming around during the siege of Paris, and this went for kids as well. Often, so Sarah kind of employed a number of them on a number of occasions to do sort of like errands and, you know, go to the pharmacy and get this medicine for this person and, you know, do these things. You know, they were eager to help, looking for something to do, and, you know, they would get a bit of money in their back pocket.
She
and if
would
they had
quite
some spare
happily
food,
delegate, basically.
yeah. There was one particular boy who had gone off, and this clearly really traumatized her. And he'd been sent off to the sort of chemist, the pharmacy down the road to get some more medicine. And he was nearly there. She could see him nearly there on the street. She was watching him out the window, which I thought was a bit weird. It's kind of like, it's like, if you're delegating him because you don't have time, why are you just watching it?
Yeah. What?
No, it's a little bit like, you know, when your mum lets you walk to school for the first time and she actually doesn't let you walk to school on your own for the first time and follows you.
And pushes on the way there. Like.
Yeah, but yeah, he was nearly there, and a shell hit him in the chest.
Oh.
Well, actually, it bounced off of the floor, didn't necessarily explode, and then hit him in the chest and went off.
Oh.
And I'll give you a really strong warning. This is really unpleasant if anyone wants to stop watching this now.
Yeah.
Go to you too, Lucy. So yeah, she managed to get someone else's attention to, you know, go with her and point out what had happened, but she was sort of barely able to speak because she had just watched this. She said, "When we reached the poor child, his intestines were all over the ground. His chest and his poor little red chubby face had the flesh entirely taken off.
Oh my God.
He had neither eyes, nose, nor mouth. Nothing but some hair at the end of a shapeless bleeding mass a yard away from his head. It was as though a tiger had torn open the body with its claws and emptied it with fury and a refinement of cruelty, leaving nothing but the poor little skeleton."
Oh, Jesus.
That is really. I mean, imagine the guilt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She has sent a little boy to go and get something from the pharmacy. She's she's so busy that she's managed to go and look out of the window and watch it happen, only to discover that a shell hits him.
She's basically sent him to his death.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
mean, that could have been Sarah.
Yeah.
Couldn't it?
I don't think she ever really sort of gets over her, you know, kind of distress at this whole war.
No.
So, you know, she gave the impression at the beginning of it of being sort of, you know, very much, you know, she was supportive of the troops. You know, she wanted France to win, all of that. It was really sad when, you know, the French troops sort of gave up and Germans and the Prussians came to Paris. But sort of, you know, by the end of this, it was just kind of, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter anymore. The whole thing just needs to, you know, stop.
Yeah, the politics of war is lost when you start seeing the reality of war.
Yeah, and this is, she couldn't avoid it. It was right in front of her.
Oh, jeez.